Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of the Voice for Freedom podcast, a podcast of Arise, where we talk about freedom and Israel and Western civilization and the nexus point of all those things. I'm very, very happy to have with us today a distinguished guest, John Guandolo. And John is a friend, and he is a national security consultant. I'm going to read through his bio. There are layers to this. And John has done some amazing things in his career. So what I'm going to read off to you here is going to just be the tip of the iceberg. But John is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Marine Infantry and Reconnaissance Officer, and a combat veteran. He served as a special agent in the FBI and created the first training programs in the government related to the global Islamic movement. The U.S. communist movement and strategies to defeat those things. John was recruited out of the FBI in 2008 by the Department of Defense to conduct strategic analysis of the Islamic and communist threats. Currently trains and consults with citizens and leaders about these threats and the campaign plan to defeat them. So, John, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today.
Oh, it's great to be with you. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm going to throw some bunch of questions at you today, and I know it'll be very informative for our viewers and listeners. And I do want to circle around, of course, in the end to what you're doing today and how they can engage with it, because I think there will be a lot of people that'll be interested in engaging with your platform and what you're doing. First thing I want to ask is what I didn't mention on here is that I happen to know that you are a singer, songwriter, and performing artist. So before we get into all the messy stuff, I wanted to just ask you, how's that all going? What's happening on that front in your life?
So that's fascinating to me that you're asking that question, because today, my current band in Dallas, we just released a new single called Sunday Lazy Afternoon. And this band, it just like literally at midnight released on all the major music platforms. The band is Johnny and the G-Men. And it's been pretty exciting because music is taking a bigger and bigger role in my life, which is nice because the stuff you and I are going to talk about is not so pleasant. And it's not only a really good release for me, but we're actually, a lot of doors are opening and we're having some real success for me, both on the songwriting side and the performing side. So it's really nice.
I love it. And we'll put a link to that up on this episode so people can actually just click right over and listen to that.
Yeah. Like it, follow us, share it.
Love it. Hey, yeah, if you love music, singer-songwriter stuff, and if you're a patriot and connect to music along those lines, you definitely want to check out John's music. So check that out here and enjoy it. So let's just jump right in. The first question I have is a very, very vague question, John, which is, how bad is it?
Well, I think that it's actually not that vague, because I guess I'd start by saying it's much worse than people think it is. It's not unusual that I'm speaking to crowds of varying sizes and I'll ask a question, how many of you feel like you have a pretty good handle on what's going on? And, 2/3 of the room will raise their hand. And then I'll start asking questions or sharing stuff. And then you can see by the look on their faces, they realize it's much worse than they think it is. And, I just gave a presentation in the Dallas area to a pretty large group of conservative individuals who, call themselves patriots and think they have a pretty good handle on things. And they realize things are much worse than they thought, to the point I got several questions similar to, is there any hope? Can we actually win this thing? And the fact that is not only a question that's asked, but I would argue is a legitimate question, and I can't guarantee the answer to that. I think people should be concerned. But I say it, you and I mentioned it before the podcast. I think most people don't think they need to buy a fire extinguisher until their front door's on fire. And most people can look at Europe and go, wow, that's really bad, and then turn and go back to work or go to the movies or go out to dinner. And because there aren't bombs dropping around us from airplanes, we think we're not at war. And America's at war with a determined enemy that is working together, the communist movement, the Islamic movement. They have a very focused effort. They're very well coordinated from the international level down to the local level in the United States. For some reason, because It's not immediately affecting us, or so we think. Many people believe they can just go about their day and it will either go away, or Mr. Trump's going to take care of it, or I don't have to do anything. And if every American citizen doesn't engage in this, we will lose this war. So that's how bad it is from my professional perspective.
I'm very much on the same page with you. I recently was asked a very similar question. I was traveling with my brother and our Israeli counterpart. And after we went through our presentation, somebody did pose that same question to us. Well, is there any hope? Can we actually turn this around? And my answer was, that depends on us. That depends on those of you in this room. That depends on what we do from here. And I've also been saying for quite some time, Simone knows, as we look at this and consider what could potentially turn things around, the unfortunate reality from my perspective is that because we haven't faced an existential threat, at least an overt and explicit existential threat in so many years here in this country, we just have no idea. We're out of touch with what's happening in the world. And the fact that we are up against an enemy that, for those of us that share our value system, we are outnumbered against an enemy that's better resourced than we are, more organized than we are, more motivated than we are. And if we don't wake up and do something about it, we are going to reap the consequences of that. And we are already seeing that, right? So, we're already there. And I think that's what you and people like ourselves are trying to get people to see and to open up. I guess that could lead into the next question, and we're going to get into the weeds on, this bizarre sort of coalition between, Islamism, communism, and wokeism, and the fact that there's a war being waged against our value system and against Western civilization as we know it. But before I go there, how imminent would you say it is, the threat of an October 7th scale attack on American soil, in your opinion?
So that is a great question. It's a question I got last night, and it's a question I'm starting to get more frequently. First of all, it's important to note a couple things. First, about me and my organization. We have a pretty substantial intelligence network here in the United States. And so we have a pretty good bead on what's going on. But I would also say this for everyone out there, you don't necessarily need that. We're at a point where the enemy is communicating very clearly among themselves in a public way, as well as internally. And that's a similar message. And so when you understand how they communicate and what their words mean when they communicate, it's actually pretty easy to do predictive analysis, which is why, when Steve Coughlin and I were both recruited out of our respective places into the DoD, we were the only ones on the planet that predicted the Muslim Brotherhood's revolution in the Middle East in January 2011, almost to the week. I mean, we were briefing in October, November 2010, and we said in the next 60 to 90 days, this is going to happen. And we laid it out with pretty specific details about how it would roll out, where it would begin, and how it would transpire in other countries. And it is still playing out as we briefed. And it's not because, although I think Steve's a lot smarter than I am, I would say it's not that we have a crystal ball. It's that when you understand the enemy, you understand their doctrine and their strategy, and you know how they communicate, it's actually, you can do predictive analysis, which, by the way, in the U.S. government, nobody does. Nobody in the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA does any predictive analysis. We haven't done it for 25 years in the U.S. government. I mean, we just don't have.
Why is that?
Because it's unprofessional. We have an unprofessional cadre of people in our intelligence community. If I randomly grabbed 100 people out of the U.S. intelligence and gave them a 10-question questionnaire, in my experience, because I have done it in my training for years, they don't know the enemy. They don't understand the communist movement. They can't explain communism in 1 minute or less. They don't understand the Islamic movement. They can't explain Sharia or its role in the war. They're absolutely clueless. And by the way, when I was doing this in the FBI, in the DoD, and since, when I was briefing senior government officials, including 3- and 4-star generals and admirals, they don't have a freaking clue. They couldn't explain to you what drives Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran. Why do they do what they do? They can't
That's
explain it.
scary.
They had no idea what Sharia is. I mean, it's just a complete catastrophic failure. And it's not only unprofessional, because Americans are dead. I've argued for years it's criminal negligence and we should be putting some of these people in jail, but maybe
Couldn't
that's
agree
a
more.
different
Well, yeah, maybe we'll bite into that. So I would think if there's one thing that every American should want our intelligence services to be involved with, it would be predictive analysis. Like,
yeah.
isn't that the core of what you do, identifying enemies and predicting potential attacks? And so that's really scary, and it merits the question, well, what in the world are they doing, and how did we get to where we are? And I think we probably have some understanding of that. But I do want to just throw this at you, because I think
Well,
this is sort of—
hold on. Let me interject
Sure.
if I could, because what you just said, these are really important questions you're posing. And the question of how we got here is because how we got here, it's the intentional outcome of a coordinated effort by a communist movement that's been in the United States for 100 plus years, by an Islamic movement that's been in the United States for 60 plus years, and the fact they've been working together for decades. And you've got these efforts that primarily, 90% of what they're doing is in the non-violent, the non-kinetic realm, to subvert key institutions. And this goes for everywhere, but we're talking about the United States, the religious institutions, the media, education, the political realm, the security services, espionage and counterintelligence operations, the propaganda operations, economic warfare, all of this working to undo our key institutions and subvert them. And so this is primarily information warfare, primarily. And the violence they use is used to move that bigger information warfare dynamic forward. And yet 100% of the US government, DHS, FBI, et cetera, is all focused only on violence. I mean, when people ask, how would I rate the counterintelligence effort in the United States? And I'd rate it at 0. It's non-existent. And there are individuals and there are little groups in different parts of the United States government and I'm just talking at the federal level, that are really good inside DIA, not really inside the FBI, but there are some individuals that do work. There are individuals in certain organizations inside the federal government, including organizations most people don't know exist. But there is no counterintelligence. I mean, this should be the scariest thing anybody hears.
It absolutely is.
I mean, it's unbelievable to me that and we could make this a whole thing, but I'll just drop a couple things that, we go back to, and it really in the Clinton administration was when it really was the undoing of America. But, you have an Al-Qaeda guy in the advisory role to the President of the United States, Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, who is the number one fundraiser for Al-Qaeda in North America, is the advisor to the President of the United States. I mean, what does that tell Americans about how effective the FBI and Secret Service are at vetting and clearing people, all the way to today, when we now have literally terrorists and jihadis inside the Trump administration, and nobody seems to care. And there are people that are directly putting those people there that Mr. Trump thinks are good people, that are reliable people. And so everything in between that, from Mr. Clinton in the 90s to today, literally today, it's a complete goat rope. And so the question America has to ask, going back to your question, is, well, how did this happen? Well, it happened because our adversaries have published doctrine, published strategies, hundreds of lines of operation, a massive network here in the United States. And the response from the 1992 to today has not only been not to address it, but it's been to advance these hostile movements, either wittingly or unwittingly. And there are traitors inside the U.S. government. Most people are cowards. They're unwilling to abide by their oath of office, and they're more interested in their next promotion or money in their bank account. I mean, we can go, so there's so many directions. I mean, I look at the great work Peter Schweitzer did when we published the book Red Handed, and you look, he just in the book, which is now a couple of years old, he identified a couple dozen former senators and congressmen from both political parties in the United States working directly for organizations that are controlled by Chinese Communist Party, military, and intelligence. I mean, and these people should be in prison, but they're doing it for money. One more point I want to make about this, because your question is so big. If you look at senior State Department, CIA, FBI officials, DOD officials, and you wonder why aren't they doing their jobs? Well, because when you get to that executive level of any of these key institutions, they are working with representatives of hostile governments like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, other, really Iran's the only one that nobody will really touch. They still do, but these other governments that throw 7 and sometimes 8-figure salaries. If I'm a senior executive in the CIA who has no moral, foundation, am I going to actually call out these countries for doing what they're doing? Or am I going to just violate my oath of office and be a traitor? Well, of course, you and I, we know the answer to that. Of course, we'd crush these people if we were in these positions. But, these guys are getting out of these organizations and going and getting these salaries, which, number one, I think is inconsistent with their constitutional oath. But I think in some cases, a violation of federal law. And this is why. I mean, it's unbelievable. Our adversaries are running circles around us. And the strategic response from the Clinton administration to today has been zero. And not only zero, we're actually taking actions that advance these hostile movements.
Yeah, it seems worse than zero. So let's go there. So you've got this far right, the whole MAGA movement that basically nothing Trump does is wrong, and America first, and they don't understand foreign policy at all, and the fact that America first should certainly involve, foreign policy, and a strong foreign policy and strong alliances with countries like Israel, not a perfect country, but a country that shares our value system for democracy and freedom and Judeo-Christian values and so on and so forth. So here we are, and with what's taken place over the course of the last several weeks with the Trump administration, how concerned should we be as Americans? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, so that's a big question, and there are a lot of pieces to it. Let me start towards the end of your question with Israel. Israel's an independent nation, and in my opinion, like every nation, should act to its own benefit to defend itself and its own interests. That's it. Now, Israel's in a strange position because it stands alone. It's surrounded by enemies that literally call for its obliteration. And so that's one part of the issue. So America has made a commitment because of what you said, because of the fact that it's really one of the only other countries in the world. And I would argue today, maybe the only country in the world.
Starting to look that way.
I'll make this point. Britain is an adversary of the United States. Britain is no longer an ally. Britain's an adversary. An argument could be made that other countries like Australia, you got to put a question mark over these countries because of the direction they've gone, both towards the communist and the Islamic direction they've gone, where they've submitted themselves to. They're not defending liberty. They're not defending natural law. They're not defending the Western principles that have held Western civilization together. So we're in a real quandary. The other problem, I believe, with regard specifically to the relationship with Israel, is that Israel itself is divided. I mean, Israel is proven. I mean, and I'll use the example of what they did during COVID. Pretty tyrannical policies of basically, mass inoculation.
Some of the most extreme.
This sent shivers down a lot of, patriots' backs. The United States did it similarly, but it was, so there are pockets in Israel that are very anti-liberty, but I think Israel as a whole obviously is not. I'll also say it's a running joke with my friends who are Jewish, because I have a great relationship with American conservative Jews, but it's a joke. I literally have a list of conservative American Jews in my phone, and it's not a long list. And my friends who are conservative Jews are like, let me see that list. And they look at the, 2 to 3 dozen names, and they're like, "Yep, that's about it."
Right.
and
And the other side are some of the worst enemies of our cause, unfortunately, and
that's
some of the
right.
worst
And
enemies of
so,
Israel. Let's just say it.
this is what I think is Americans who maybe don't understand all that's going on. They look at those people in Israel that are literally siding with or undecided about Hamas or about the Islamic movement in general. Now, there are fewer today than there were 5 years ago
Oh, absolutely.
because of what happened. And I think in many ways, what Hamas did on October 7th brought some people either towards the center or over and that's, you can't
Most
deny
certainly.
that. I mean, and I've been to Israel and I've met people who are in like the northernmost kibbutz there, right there where they have people right across the border flying the Hezbollah flag and telling them, "We're coming for you." Um, and so I think Israel is a complicated country, and I think it's like in many ways America. I find more unity in maybe thought in many European countries and even other countries in Asia and Africa than I do in Israel and the United States. And sometimes people that don't maybe understand that will take something they see or hear by a group in Israel and say, "Oh, well, this is why we don't want to support Israel." And I think but that's life. I mean, this is just the life of dealing with any nation state.
Can I just talk that for a second? I think it is really important to always keep in mind the macro and sort of the
That's right.
principles that define a society. And when you look at, democracy is always going to be a pendulum, right? There's the swinging of power back and forth between the left and the right, and so on and so forth. And that's the beauty of how democracy works. And the system itself tends to purge itself because of the impact of these different movements and administrations that come and go, and so on and so forth. That is very much true of Israel. And so it's easy to point to any society and pick out, the things that you don't like. But as a whole, I think it's safe to say, like you just said, that of all the countries of the world that share, Western civilized values and Judeo-Christian values, as a whole, I'd say that Israel is the closest aligned with the United States. And you couldn't be more accurate in defining what's taken place over the course of the last year and a half in Israel. There for a time there was almost no left anymore in Israel, because how could you look at the atrocities
That's right.
that took place on October 7th and not be persuaded more towards, well, just really like you said. I love that you used the word natural law. I don't hear anyone talking about natural law. And the number one rule of natural law is self-preservation. And where is it? Where is self-preservation today across the Western world? And just being able to look at a threat and say, okay, that is a threat to me, my family, my way of living, so on and so forth. It's very easy, in the wake of 10/7, of what happened on October 7th, for Israelis to look and say, okay, like, this is about me surviving. This is about my people
Right.
surviving, my country surviving. And that tends to influence the way you see things. Most of those villages and kibbutzim that were attacked in the south of Israel were peace camps. These were people that believed in peace and coexistence with our neighbors, and were attacked. And many of them were deeply engaged in movements to try to facilitate that. And they were attacked. You listen to some of the hostages that came back that said, I was a peace activist. I don't believe in it anymore. After seeing and experiencing what I experienced in captivity in Gaza, I don't think it's actually possible. And so there is this sort of pendulum swinging that's constantly swinging. And I think, look, we're going to learn one way or the other. The question is, are we going to see and understand what's happening ahead of time and be able to get out in front of it and change it? Or are we going to learn by experience? Because you cannot contradict the natural laws and achieve health and well-being as a society or as an individual, as any created thing. It's not a possibility. So I'm going on a little bit of a rant here and kind of getting off topic.
No, but I
We'll
think
bring it back.
what you're saying is right on the mark. And I think, when you look around the world, I would ask your audience, what countries are standing on bedrock Western principles? And, maybe Poland, maybe is Hungary, which is almost unbelievable that today we're talking about Hungary, a country that
Right.
used to be fully communist. But I mean, Israel, America, And I think we're done. I mean, but I do not see in Europe really, other than what I just mentioned, I don't see any country standing up. Now, the interesting thing is just recently, and there's a difference between what the government is doing and where the people are. Catholics and Protestants in huge numbers marching down the street in Ireland calling for a reestablishment of those principles and a defeat of Islam and a defeat of communism. You see in France, I don't remember the number, but it was well over 100,000 people praying and
I saw that.
Calling on God to help France. I mean, so there are things happening, but I think life, as you just mentioned, life has a way, reality has a way of bringing people who are unwilling to listen to change their attitudes. And again, make you realize, hey, maybe now that my living room's on fire, I should consider getting a fire extinguisher. And that's kind of where I think some people are. But a lot of people, the fire's on their front doorstep and they're like, it'll eventually go out if I just don't do anything about it.
And that's because we've been so privileged in this country. We've been so, and I know that word is thrown around way too much, but we really have been so privileged to experience freedom and not in touch at all anymore with the cost of it. And you and I both know freedom isn't free. And I think that, I think inarguably, this is a pivotal moment in the history of this country and in the history of the globe, truly. And, you can look at some of these countries that you've mentioned across the continent of Europe. And for some of them, I think it's clear it's too late. You're already fighting from a losing position. Not to say you can't take it back, but the fight is a much different once it goes certain directions that it has clearly gone in these countries. And I would say that in the United States, and I'd be curious your take with exactly where we're at, I think we're close. We're not there yet. I think there's still time if people can wake up. I think the first job that you and I probably share in the work that we do is getting people to wake up, getting people to see what's happening so that they do begin to act. But I still think there's time here in the United States, but we're not far. We're not far from fighting from that losing position. Maybe you would say that we're already across that line. I'd be curious.
Well, I think we are across the line. I think there are a few pieces in this. First of all, I always tell people who ask, is there any hope in the United States of us rectifying this? And I think there's always hope. And if there wasn't, I would be sitting on a beach in Tahiti or somewhere with an umbrella.
For me, it's New Zealand with the fly rod.
Yeah, I'd be kind of. But I do believe. I believe what America is, which has never existed on the face of the earth before it. We come from a history of civilization where, besides that time in history before Israel, asked God for a king, before that, apart from that, the history of the world is a time when the world was ruled by kings, emperors, czars, caliphs, one individual. And America created a system that had never existed before by a group of men who decided, hey, our rights, our lives, everything we are comes from God. So how do we create a government and a law, is based on that understanding that out of natural law and Holy Scripture, we're going to create a government that is the best thing we know how to do, understanding human nature, right? That concupiscence that we all have, that we tend towards sin. How do we deal with that and build a government that understands all these things and recognizes that our rights come from God? And we built this amazing country, but it was based on an understanding that we have pretty much thrown away, especially in the last 50 years here in the United States. We've kind of thrown that away, but it's happened because of these hostile movements that have inch by inch, piece by piece. If you turn a ship 1 degree to the right and you travel 1,000 miles, you will not hit your destination. And that's where we are. And so a couple things. From the perspective of the Islamic movement in the United States, they believe it's over. They believe it's game over.
It's checkmate.
And they're just
already.
That's right. They're running the clock out. And I think this is an important point. But there's also in the Islamic community in the United States, there is a real battle going on. And it's not a good one. It's not like, oh, good. There are people who want peace and they want, a constitutional republic. No, that's not part of it's whether we raise the black flag over the mosques and get to business, or whether we keep doing it the way we've been doing it, which is we subvert and undercut the federal government, the Trump administration, the state governments, the state legislatures, and local communities, or do we just get to people? That's literally the friction point in the U.S. Islamic community. And I can't overstate that. The leadership,
that's a very bold statement.
Well, the leadership of the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood is having that friction because the Muslim Brotherhood wants to continue. And this is the same friction point that they had with Al-Qaeda about 9/11 and about, when to go kinetic and when not to. And my point is, you have to understand friction points between Islamic nation states, Islamic military orgs, and Islamic movements like Tablighi Jamaat, Jamaat-e Islami, Muslim Brotherhood. They all have the same goal: to establish a global Islamic state, a caliphate under Sharia, period. So just because Saudi Arabia and Iran want each other destroyed does not mean they're our allies, either one.
Okay, so I want to talk about this for a second because I think this is a really, really important point for all of us, all of our viewers, all of those that share our value systems. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on as far as I'm concerned. I think we are seeing a significant change, a pivot. And I think one of the one of the problems that our society is facing right now because of the place that we're coming out of and this pendulum that swung from far left to now far right, seemingly, and all of the America First dialogue that's taking place, so on and so forth, and that whole movement, there seems to be a miscalculation or miscalibration in understanding something. And so I want to talk about it just for a second. And what I mean by that is there seems to be a divergence from our country, our people, and our civilization, and the desire to bring freedom and bring our value system to the rest of the world. And I feel like we're at a place now where this current administration is saying, we're not here to bring freedom to other countries any longer. What they do on their own, ground is up to them. They have the liberty to do that. So we don't care. We're going to make a treaty with people that don't share our value system at all, that aren't committed at all to women's rights. Some of these moderate leaning states, as you've mentioned, some of them that, the Trump administration is forming these treaties with, women aren't even allowed to drive or vote, right? And so instead of our people standing up for our value system, our ideals, and not forming treaties with and alliances with countries that don't share our value system, we're going the opposite direction, thinking that we are going to reap some benefit from that in the long run. And it's such short-sightedness when you understand that every single one of those countries are doing the exact opposite. They are actually trying to impose their ideals on our way of life. And not just trying, they're doing it. And so, it's almost like just again, these natural laws. If there's no offense, if you're not trying to spread goodness and bring the light that you have to the rest of the world, you take a completely quote unquote defensive posture, you're going to lose. And I think that's the place that we're in right now. And I think it's really important for us to wake up and understand this. Part of our value system is not being selfish. That's part of our value system. Part of our value system is bringing goodness to the rest of the world. And when you abandon that, you put yourself in such a compromised place when you think that you could just be America first. We're just going to build riches here. It's not going to work. Anyway, I want another rant, but I'd love for you to talk to that a little bit and what's happening, this shift and this, in my thinking, very flawed mindset of, hey, we can just form alliances with anybody that has any agenda and any value system, even if it contradicts our own. Can you talk to that a little bit on what we're seeing right now and how concerned we should be with that?
Yes. So first of all, I appreciate your rant. This is a big question, and this really goes to the heart and soul of America and who we are. There's this narrative out there, which is a comes from the communist playbook, that if you don't accept everybody, you're somehow exclusive and racist and all this. And this has infiltrated the Christian church. It's this nonsense. And it's not a Christian principle, by the way. Matter of fact, the Christian church has taught since its inception in the first century that if someone doesn't behave in the way prescribed by Jesus, then you put them out of the church, right? You give them opportunity. You go talk to them. If they reject what you're saying, you go to them with another brother. And if they reject, then you take the priest with you. And if they reject them, Paul the apostle said, you put them out, hand them over to Satan. And if they repent, you can bring them back in. These are pretty basic. You don't let a cannibal babysit your children. And you would think that's common sense. But what I just said is, in today's world, is controversial. And that's because, and this goes to one of the several points that I'd like to bring up in answering your question, is the communist movement and the Islamic movement, but more so the communist movement, in achieving their goal of establishing a communist world, on the path to doing it, the destruction of reasoned thought has to be achieved at some level for them to get there. And I would argue that there is an abundance of evidence that in the West, reasoned thought has been crumbling. If someone were to say 100 years ago there are 75 genders, they wouldn't be taken seriously for 1 second because it's absurd. If someone were to say that all cultures offer some value, you'd be laughed out of the room, because there are cultures that sacrifice human beings, and they think that's okay. And there are plenty of other examples in the history of mankind. All cultures are not the same. And the founders of the United States of America specifically said that. We are a culture that has similar understanding about what life is, who God is. And the God that America believes in is the God of the Old and New Testament. It's not the God of the Quran. It's not somebody else. However, America says, quite generously to its credit, you may come here if you're willing to accept our law and our government. There's a reason that the founders said only Christians should be elected to public office. And every state constitution at the time the U.S. Constitution was ratified required a public proclamation of Christian faith to hold office. It's not because they were racist. It's because they understood, if you understand this worldview, how could you be something else? Or you don't believe in natural law and Holy Scripture and execute laws, legislate laws, adjudicate laws, be a judge and review these laws and make judgments on them. You can't. And yet America still says all are welcome. Now, to say that in today's world, people's heads explode. Can you imagine someone proclaiming this publicly? And yet that's how the government, it's why the Bible was in America from the 1600s when people landed here at Jamestown and Plymouth to 1965. But it was intentional that the Bible was removed and public prayer was discouraged in public schools. And then eventually in many schools. Now there are places in America where they still do it, but it's now the exception. To the point now today, Christianity is attacked. Judaism is openly attacked in the public square by elected officials. It's outrageous. So when we talk about these questions, I think we need to look at the fact that the very principles upon which not only Western civilization, but specifically America's law and government rest are completely under assault and have been completely unpacked. But I think it's not just one thing. It is an entire series. It's the assault on and the destruction of reasoned thought. It's that the very, beginning in the 30s, what has been taught in U.S. public schools about America, about its foundation, about the very men who founded it, has been completely not just whitewashed, it's been assaulted and replaced with a narrative that is fictional. And so we could go on and on about that. And those are just, 5 or 8 of the lines of operations that the communists and the jihadis have used. But there are literally hundreds that assault our foundation that have led to where we are today.
So I want to, because I know we want to respect your time, and we're going to have to wind down here. And I want to bring the conversation around to what people can do to engage in this. We're constantly talking about it through the work of Arise and what we're doing. I'd love to have you back on here to talk about these things, because we clearly don't have enough time to discuss all of them in detail. So I want to ask 2 more questions. One is going to be about your organization, what you're doing, and how people can engage with it. But before I get to that, just along the lines of what we're talking about, I want to just talk for a second about Islamism. I would like you to talk to this, and Islamophobia, and then how this factors into this conversation about the natural laws that exist in the universe and self-preservation, how those things fit in. There are many voices that are starting to speak out. I'm not going to mention them by name, but for those that are paying attention, there are people that are starting to look at Islam, macro Islam, an inclusive view of it, and try to measure it against Western civilization, our values. And can these 2 things coexist? And then that leads to, of course, the minutia of that, and the way it plays out and the way we talk about it and address it. And this conversation now, I'm sure you have friends that are Muslims. I do. I have family members that may be Muslim and are, of course, more in the moderate mindset. But I think as a whole, we've got to be able to look at this and determine, does this value system align with mine? Can these things coexist in tandem? And then based on that, how should I feel about it? How should I feel about if I even say, well, I'm afraid of that because it could destroy me and my way of living, and immediately somebody jumps down your throat and says, that's Islamophobic. Can you just talk to that a little bit? Islamism versus Islamophobia and that issue.
So this goes to the idea of the destruction of reason thought. I mean, I think the one thing that's astounded me over the years I've done this for well over 2 decades is the fact that reality is very hard for people to grasp. But I'll begin by saying this. I haven't seen anywhere that what Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and others publish about Islam that's incorrect, according to authoritatively published Islamic doctrine. I don't like to use any other term than Islam. I think they muddy the water. It's Islam. And if we just go to authoritatively published Islamic law and textbooks used to teach Muslim children about Islam, they all say the exact same thing. And I can tell you, I have reviewed dozens and dozens of textbooks for 10, 11, 12-year-olds in Islamic schools on every continent, Asia, Europe. I actually had access to a place that had collected them that is in Virginia, where I used to live. And I literally have gone through many of those. I have some that I teach out of when I teach people. And I've read Islamic law, normative, universally taught Islamic law. And I just ask people, what does Islam say the purpose of Islam is? And the answer is pretty simple. Islam says its purpose is to wage war against the non-Muslim community to establish a global Islamic state under Allah's divine law, Sharia. That's the purpose of Islam. That's what Islam says. There's nowhere in Islam that it says something different from that. Now, you can go to Barnes & Noble and buy a book that says it's about Islam, published by a Muslim, for you, the non-Muslim audience, that says something different. But this goes to one very key point. In Islamic law, it is a capital crime for Muslims to teach other Muslims anything about Islam that's not true. It's part of the law of apostasy. And in Islamic law, it's obligatory for Muslims to lie to non-Muslims if the goal is obligatory. That's the language in Islamic law. And it is obligatory to advance Islam and establish an Islamic state under Sharia because it's the purpose of Islam. So if we understand those things, and we understand that Sharia comes from the Quran as understood through the lens of abrogation, and the fact that every verse in the Quran has been legally defined in the tafsir, and the example, the sunnah, the example of the Prophet Muhammad, what he did and said, if we just go to that, Muhammad himself, in authoritative Islamic law, the authoritative biographies, the authoritative hadiths, Muhammad himself said, I've been commanded to wage war until I testify there's no God but Allah. He participated in torture. He condemned people to death for the various laws in Islamic law. He participated in beheading up to 900 Jews after the Battle of the Trench. If you read his biography, just go to the table of contents in Sirat Rasulullah, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and just look at the table of contents. Raid, battle, killing this guy, capturing these people, battle, raid. That's the whole thing. So when you tell me that true Islam, as Mr. Bush lied in front of the entire world when he said, those who did what they did on 9/11 blasphemed Allah, that's a flat out lie. Those people earned, according to Islam, the highest level of paradise. And there's no version of Islam that says anything different. And I challenge people, those people that are grinding their teeth right now, name one authoritative book of Islamic law or one textbook used to teach Muslim children about Islam that says something different. And I've offered $1,000 cash now for 5 years. And I've emailed the leaders of US Hamas, by the way, with this challenge. And of course, they respond by calling me names and telling me what a horrible person I am, but they can't deny it because they know what it is, because that's what they're doing, because they're Hamas. And if you read Hamas's covenant, I would ask you, as horrific as it is, what part of it is inconsistent with normative and universally taught Islamic law? So to your question, a Muslim is someone who subscribes to Islam. Now, there's two parts to this that are very important. If you're a president or a world leader and you tell us that Islam is awesome, there are two problems with that. Number one, you're a liar and you are not doing your duty to defend your country against this evil and barbaric doctrine. But number two, people who ascribe or identify as being Muslim who want to get out of Islam but can't because they're enslaved by it and they know that there's a death penalty if they leave it, you're basically doubling down on the bars that hold them in. Instead of being the Ronald Reagan that called the Soviet Union an evil empire and called for the wall between East and West Germany to be ripped down, what you're saying is, hey, good to go. Keep those people enslaved. We don't give a crap, which is evil. So you're doubling down on evil on two different sides of this thing. So are there people who identify as Muslims that don't want to wage war against non-Muslims? Sure. But we don't base national security based on the outliers. What we've seen around the world in Africa and Asia is that when the sword is put to their neck, Muslims normally side with the jihadis. And that's the reality of it. And so are we going to base the defense of our families and our countries based on this small percentage of people?
I think that's a great point.
Who call themselves moderate Muslims. And by the way, in the United States, the leading moderate Muslims are batting for the other team. The Zuhdi Jassers, the Raheel Razas, the Kanta Ahmeds. Those are bad people. And if you want to challenge me on that, feel free.
Maybe we'll find somebody that does. We could have a very interesting podcast.
I'd love to have that debate because I've been doing this a long time and I've worked with these people. So this is the challenge. But what we are called to do is you have to speak truth about Islam. And then we have to live in reality. Let's look at what the global Islamic movement has done in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe. And what they have done is they've conquered nations. The UK is gone. I argued to leaders in the UK in 2009. They were gone then. And of course, they chastised me, thought I was overspeaking my point when I was in the UK. And they called and said, yeah, hey, we're looking at property in Switzerland. And I'm like, interesting.
Well, we know that Qatar owns more property in Great Britain than the royal family today. So that's an interesting point. And I think, one of the things I think, again, coming back to this value system, and thank you for sharing all that. That is a perspective that's you don't hear very often. And I think, we tend to look at people in terms of how we can benefit from them. So when we look at some of these moderate leaning states, just bringing the conversation sort of full circle, we look at how we can benefit, and we focus on the benefits to our potential benefits to our economy, for instance. And there's a lot of talk about that today, and forging all of these agreements and these deals that are trillions of dollars. But we forget about the way that they treat the people in their own countries, the fact that they have actual slaves
So
in
let me
some of
just,
these countries, and the fact that women have no rights and no freedom as they experience in the Western world. And and this notion that, well, we can still benefit from it, but we don't care about the way that they treat the people in their own countries, in their own lands, and how flawed of a logic that is. So yeah, please speak to that.
so a couple things. I don't know that I think our leaders intentionally, it's like I don't think it's we forget. I think they know it, and they're looking at dollar signs or other things. They're not looking at national security. That's the first point. Second point is, I want to remind your audience that every Muslim nation on earth at the head of state and king level is a party to the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, which changed its name to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's the largest voting bloc in the UN. It's every Muslim nation on earth at the head of state and king level. And they approved in 1990 and served to the United Nations in 1993, the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam. And I'll sum up the entire declaration with its final article, Article 25, which says, and I quote, Islamic Sharia is the only source of reference for their understanding of all the articles in this declaration, which is the Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, which means the entire Muslim world only understands relations with individuals and other countries through Sharia. And 100% of Sharia states that non-Muslims must convert to Islam or be killed unless you're Jewish, Christian, or Zoroastrian. And then you must convert to Islam, submit to Islamic law, pay the non-Muslim poll tax, or be killed. That's it.
If that doesn't send a shiver up people's spine.
So my question is, why would you be doing business with them? If you notice, the deals that Mr. Trump did with Qatar are 10-year deals. The first nuclear deal that the Obama administration did with Iran was a 10-year deal. Why? Because of Sharia. Because who's the greatest example in Islam? Muhammad. And he said you can make a 10-year deal, a treaty with the non-Muslims in order to benefit you, and when you're not in a position of strength. But as soon as you are in a position of strength, of course, you must resume the jihad. So the ignorance of Islam by Mr. Trump and his administration is deadly to the United States, as it was under the Bush administration. I would argue that, and under the Clinton administration, I would argue under the Biden and Obama administration, they were intentionally working with the terrorists in Iran and Hamas, as evidenced by the fact they hired them into the administration, and that we know that they were working with them and promoting them. So it's a little different deal there. So I'll give Mr. Trump the benefit of the doubt that he's not intentionally bringing terrorists into his organization, but he's still bringing them in. And
Right.
therein
It's just
lies
out
the
of
problem.
ignorance. So I want to pivot for a minute, because I know you've got to jump here and just talk quickly about your organization, what you're doing now, how people can engage with it in order to, impact. I know you're working not at the federal level, but you're really working at the community level right now. Can you tell us about that? And we'll, of course, have a link to your website here where people can connect with what you're doing.
Yes. So what I've been doing since I got out of the Department of the Defense in 2012 is basically continuing the work I did in the FBI and the DoD, which is educating and training citizens, leaders, those whose profession it is to protect the community at the local, state, and federal level. But because of the gross corruption in the U.S. government at the federal level, the fact that no governor in the last 20 plus years has done anything to identify and vanquish the enemy, we are, what we do, what my organization does, is we train communities at the county level, citizens first, local officials and local law enforcement and other organizations if they choose to, but citizens. And number one, we help them understand the true nature of the threat in their community. First, we give them an overview of what's going on at the international level, the national level. But then here are these same networks of communists and jihadis in your county. We train them and teach them how to organize, literally create a team at the local level, how to identify the bad guys, the communists and jihadis, and people collaborating with and financing them, and who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and then build a comprehensive plan for the county. And then detailed, what are the first 2 or 3 detailed steps they need to take to begin actually accomplishing that plan to fortify and liberate their county. And by fortify, I mean flushing these bad guys out and reestablishing a Republican form of government at the county level. And where we have trained counties, especially where we've trained multiple counties in states and they've actually organized and worked together, it's been pretty impressive. And in some areas of the country, we've done very advanced training with them and it's very effective. It's just we haven't been able to scale it because, again, people who have financial resources have not decided to actually engage and bring this up to scale. And we have talked to people at the national level. We were hoping under Trump administration, we'd be able to scale this as a part of what they're doing. But, now that they have so many jihadis and jihadi lovers around them, I don't see any way we're going to get in unless Mr. Trump himself were to do something. But we've had great success at the local level, and that's where I believe we'll actually win this war.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll share your website here for people that want to connect with that.
Yeah, and for those who want to do that, the training is called Into Action. It's a 1, 2, or 3 day program. I think it's best as at least the smallest one we do is a 1 day, which is what a lot of people choose to do. And then they're always like, wow, we wish this were longer. And like, well, it used to be. I started out, it was a 3 day program, but everyone's like, that's so long and we're so busy. And I'm like, okay, too busy to save the Republic, but I get it. A little bit not so tongue in cheek, but we do a 1 day program. And by the end of the program, we still accomplish what we're trying to do. And it's effective. We do a 2 to 3 day law enforcement program. And then we have a 2-week train the trainer program where we train people to teach what we're teaching. And so johnguandolo.com is the best way to get in touch with me and ask for any help. But I do have a lot of resources. My books are there. We have a series of videos about Sharia there, but we also have a lot of free resources on the site. So I encourage people to use it.
Fantastic. Well, folks, there you have it. I think it's unquestionable that our way of living is under attack. For those of you that are listening to this, you're probably already aware of that and looking for ways to engage. And this is one way that you can do it. I want to thank you so much, John, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to meet with us. I'd love to have more conversations with you and kind of drill down on this layers. And maybe somebody out there wants to take John up on his $1,000 offer. If you can prove him wrong, hey, we'd love to host that conversation right here. So if you disagree and you think you can prove it, please feel free, by all means. I can look at John and he looks like he's chomping at the bit to get in that discussion. Yeah. So we'd love to host that right here. Of them.
Yeah, I'd love to go there.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's all do something. Let's do something to change the way this country's going.